I grew up in a home that felt more like a military camp than a family. My father, a college professor, was a man of strict rules and high expectations. Everything about my life was controlled: my schedule, my choices, even my friendships. My older sister, Sophia, was the perfect child in his eyes. She was obedient, always focused on her studies, and seemed to do whatever she could to keep everyone happy. She was what my father wanted, and I was the opposite. I always seemed to test the boundaries, challenging him at every turn. At the dinner table, my father would snap, "Grace, sit up straight. A lady doesn't slouch." I'd roll my eyes, sit up for a moment to please him, and then slouch again as soon as he looked away. It was a constant power struggle between us. My mother, though not as openly critical, often showed her quiet disapproval. She'd raise an eyebrow at my clothes or the friends I chose, sighing as if to say, "What will the neighbors think?" I felt trapped, like nothing I did was good enough. I wasn't the perfect child Sophia was. I didn't meet my father's expectations, and it seemed like nothing I did would ever earn his approval. The more I rebelled, the more I felt like an outsider in my own family. I longed for a way out, a way to break free from their control. When I was 15, I started dating Michael, an 18-year-old college student. He was everything my parents didn't want for me, someone outside their carefully constructed world. We kept our relationship a secret, meeting in places where no one could see us. It was my little escape, a chance to experience freedom on my own terms. Michael made me feel seen, like I was more than just my father's disappointment. But little did I know, everything was about to change. I had big dreams. I wanted to go to college, leave my parents' tight grip behind, and start a life where I could make my own choices. But those dreams began to unravel when, just a few months after my 17th birthday, I started feeling queasy every morning. At first, I brushed it off as stress from the upcoming exams, but the nausea didn't go away. One day, I found myself in a gas station bathroom, staring at a pregnancy test, my hands trembling as the results came in, positive. My heart sank. I didn't know what to do. In a daze, I kept thinking about how I was going to tell Michael. Every time I tried to call him, the words got stuck in my throat. It wasn't until I couldn't avoid it any longer that I met him at our usual spot. A quiet park where no one would see us. He smiled when he saw me, but his expression shifted when he noticed my face. "What's wrong?" he asked, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, wrapping my arms around myself to steady my shaking body. "I'm pregnant," I blurted out. The silence between us was suffocating. Michael's face went through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, and then fear. "Are you sure?" he whispered. I nodded, my eyes welling with tears. "I took 6 tests. They're all positive." Michael ran his hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "You need to get rid of it, Grace. An abortion is the only option. We're too young. It'll ruin everything." I was stunned. This was the boy I thought I loved. And here he was, dismissing our baby as if it meant nothing. "Get out of my sight," I said, barely containing my anger. He left without another word, and I was left alone with the hardest decision of my life. Telling my parents was going to be even worse. I waited until after dinner, hoping to get it over with. My father sat in the living room, reading the newspaper. My mother knitted quietly in her chair. Sophia was standing nearby, her expression cautious but curious. "I have something to tell you," I began, my voice trembling. My father lowered his paper and stared at me, suspicion already in his eyes. "What is it, Grace?" Taking a deep breath, I forced the words out. "I'm pregnant." The room exploded. My father's face turned red with anger as he started yelling about shame and disappointment. My mother burst into tears, murmuring about what the neighbors would think. Sophia stood silently, her face a mixture of shock and disappointment. "You're getting an abortion," my father said firmly after a few moments of stunned silence. "We'll find a discreet clinic. No one will have to know about this mistake." At first, I resisted. I didn't want to go through with it. But the pressure was too much. A few days later, I found myself sitting in a doctor's office with my mother and Sophia by my side, their faces blank but tense. The doctor, a kind woman in her late 40s, looked over my chart and then turned to me with a concerned expression. "Grace," she said gently, "I need to tell you something important. Given your medical history, if you choose to have an abortion, there's a high chance you may not be able to have children again." Her words hit me like a wave. The thought of never being able to have children again stopped me cold. I took a deep breath, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm not doing it. I'm keeping the baby." My mother gasped, and Sophia rolled her eyes, but I stood firm. I wasn't going to let anyone force me to make a decision that wasn't right for me. The drive home was silent, filled with an unbearable tension. When we arrived, my father was waiting, eager for news. "Well?" he demanded. "She wouldn't do it," my mother spat, her voice full of frustration. "After everything we've done for her." My father's face contorted with anger, and then he spoke, his voice cold and final. "Get out. Pack your things and leave this house. You're no daughter of mine. I won't have you embarrassing this family with your condition." My mother nodded in agreement, her eyes hard and unyielding. "You heard your father," she said. Tears streamed down my face as I rushed to my room, grabbing whatever clothes I could fit into a bag. As I headed for the door, my father's voice rang out one last time. "Don't think about coming back. As far as we're concerned, you're dead to us." The door slammed shut behind me with a sound that felt devastatingly final. Alone, pregnant, and now homeless, I had no one else to turn to. I called the one person I thought might help, my Aunt Harper. I remember the long silence after I hung up the phone with my parents. The finality of their words, the weight of the door slamming behind me, left me feeling hollow, like a part of me had been ripped away. I had been kicked out, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love and protect me. The hurt of it all still felt raw, but I had to keep going. I had no choice. I was pregnant, homeless, and now completely alone. I dialed Aunt Harper's number, my hands shaking as I gripped the phone. Her voice, warm and familiar, was like a lifeline pulling me back from the edge. "Grace, what's wrong, sweetie?" she asked when she heard the tears in my voice. I explained everything, how my parents had thrown me out, how they refused to support me, how they just wanted me to erase my pregnancy like it was nothing. The words came out in a rush, as if speaking them out loud made it all more real. After a long pause, Aunt Harper said, "Where are you? Stay right there. We're coming to get you." I stood outside my aunt's house, waiting in the cold, trying to steady myself. I didn't know how much longer I could keep it together. I had hoped that, somehow, my parents would have a change of heart. But I knew deep down that they wouldn't. They never had, and they never would. My father's pride was too strong for him to admit he was wrong, and my mother, well, I never really knew her love. I had long ago accepted that. The drive to Aunt Harper and Uncle Thomas's house felt long, but the moment we pulled into their driveway, something shifted. Their small, cozy home was a stark contrast to the cold emptiness I had just left behind. It felt safe, warm, and comforting in a way I hadn't felt in years. Aunt Harper fussed over me, making sure I had something to eat, while Uncle Thomas carried my bag to the spare room. "It's not much," he said, his voice kind, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." Looking around the small room, I felt a lump form in my throat. It wasn't much, but it was all I needed. It was mine. And it was the first time in years I felt like I had a place where I truly belonged. The next few weeks were a blur of doctor's appointments, figuring out my future, and adjusting to my new life. It was overwhelming, but Aunt Harper and Uncle Thomas were patient with me, always offering support and encouragement. I was beginning to realize just how much I had taken their presence for granted all these years. They may have lived far away, but they were the family that had always shown me love and acceptance. One evening at dinner, Aunt Harper spoke up, her voice gentle yet firm. "We've been thinking," she began, and I looked up at her surprised. "We want to help you continue your education." I was stunned. Education had seemed like an impossible dream ever since my parents had turned their backs on me. I had given up on it, convinced that with a child on the way, there was no way I could balance everything. But Aunt Harper and Uncle Thomas had other ideas. "What do you mean?" I asked, almost afraid to believe it. "We've saved some money over the years," Uncle Thomas explained. "Since we never had kids, we'd like to help you go to college." I could hardly believe it. I didn't know what to say. "I don't know what to say," I stammered, my voice shaking. "Say yes," Aunt Harper said, smiling warmly at me. "We believe in you, Grace. This baby doesn't have to mean the end of your dreams." With their encouragement, I enrolled in a local community college, deciding to major in business management. It was hard, balancing classes, doctor's appointments, and pregnancy wasn't easy, but I was determined. I found a job as a waitress at a local restaurant, and the owner, Evelyn, was kind enough to give me flexible hours. It wasn't much, but it helped me save for the baby and contribute to Aunt Harper and Uncle Thomas's household. The day my son David was born was one of the most beautiful and terrifying experiences of my life. After hours of labor, I held him in my arms, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. Aunt Harper and Uncle Thomas were there, beaming with pride as they stood by my side. "What are you going to name him?" Aunt Harper asked, her voice soft. "David," I whispered, looking down at my son sleeping peacefully. "It means, God is my judge, because no matter what anyone else thinks, I know I made the right choice." Becoming a mother and starting a new chapter in my life was the most challenging yet rewarding experience. I was determined to make sure that David would never feel neglected or unwanted, that he would always know he was loved. Juggling college classes, work, and caring for my newborn was exhausting, but it was my choice. I wasn't going to let my past define me. I was building my future, and I wasn't going to let anyone stand in my way. Sometimes my mind wandered back to my parents and Sophia. Did they regret what they had done? Did they even care? I tried not to dwell on it. I had my new family now. Aunt Harper, Uncle Thomas, and my baby boy. They loved me unconditionally. That was all that mattered. Then, one day, I stumbled upon a post from Sophia on social media. My heart skipped a beat as I read it. "Excited to announce that Michael and I are engaged. Can't wait to start our life together." The photo showed Sophia smiling, her arm wrapped around Michael's, the same Michael who had abandoned me and our child without a second thought. A wave of emotions flooded me: anger, hurt, betrayal. But as I looked over at David, peacefully playing in his crib, a realization dawned on me. I didn't need their approval or their love. Everything I truly needed was right here, with David. As the days turned into weeks, life began to settle into a routine. My focus shifted to my son, David, and the life I was building with Aunt Harper and Uncle Thomas. They had become my anchor, offering me the stability and love I never got from my biological family. They didn't just provide a roof over my head, they gave me something far more valuable: acceptance. I worked hard at the restaurant, balancing my shifts with late-night study sessions. With David in my arms and my college books spread out before me, I sometimes wondered how I was managing to keep it all together. But I had no other choice. I had dreams, and those dreams were about providing a future for my son, one that was free from the neglect and hurt I had grown up with. I wanted him to have everything I never had: love, stability, and the freedom to choose his own path. Then, one day, as I was finishing up my shift at the restaurant, my boss Evelyn approached me with a smile. "Grace," she began, her voice warm, "I've been thinking about you. You're doing an amazing job here. I've seen the way you handle difficult customers, the way you organize the staff, and how you balance everything with school and being a mom. I think you'd be perfect for a promotion." I was stunned. "Me? A promotion?" Evelyn nodded. "I'm looking for a new restaurant manager. I think you have the skills to do it. You've shown me that you're reliable, hardworking, and able to handle responsibility. The hours and pay would be much better, and you'd be able to set a schedule that works for you and your family." My mind raced. This was a chance to change everything, to build a stable career while continuing to care for David. I had never imagined this opportunity would come so soon, especially not with all the challenges I had been facing. But Evelyn believed in me, and for the first time, someone was giving me a chance based on my abilities, not my past. "I can't believe this," I said, my voice shaking with excitement and disbelief. "I don't know what to say." Evelyn smiled warmly. "Say yes." And I did. The transition into the management role wasn't easy, but it was exactly what I needed. I was able to earn a better income and had more control over my schedule. It was still hard work, but it felt good knowing that I was doing it for myself, for David. As the weeks passed, I gained confidence in my ability to lead, to take charge of my life. I wasn't the scared, abandoned teenager anymore. I was a woman, a mother, building her future. David, too, was thriving. He was growing into a smart, curious boy with a love for reading and a budding interest in baseball. As he started kindergarten, he began making friends, and I could see the happiness in his eyes as he started discovering the world around him. The joy I felt watching him grow was indescribable. I wanted nothing more than to protect him, to shield him from the heartache I had experienced. But just when I thought life was finally settling into a peaceful rhythm, an unexpected phone call turned everything upside down. It was from Robert, my long-lost brother, whom I had only recently discovered through Aunt Harper's revelations. After years of searching, we had found each other. He had been adopted by a loving family after our parents had abandoned him, and now we were slowly building a relationship. "Grace," Robert's voice came through the phone, a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I have a book signing next week in our hometown. It would mean the world to me if you could come." I was taken aback. A book signing? My brother Robert had become a successful writer. I was so proud of him, but the idea of returning to the town where I grew up made me uneasy. But I couldn't say no to him, not after everything we had been through. So, I agreed. A few days later, I found myself standing in the lobby of the hotel where Robert's book signing was being held. The air was thick with tension as I looked around, noticing the familiar faces of people I hadn't seen in years, neighbors, acquaintances, and of course my parents. I hadn't seen them since they'd kicked me out, and even though I had moved on, the sight of them stirred something inside me. Robert took the stage, speaking passionately about his life, his journey, and the book that had brought him here. The room was filled with admiration as people listened to his story, but I couldn't help but focus on my parents in the front row. Their expressions were a mix of shock and confusion. They weren't expecting me to be there, and I wasn't about to let them forget what they had done. When the time came for questions, I raised my hand. My heart pounded as Robert called on me. I stood up, my voice clear and steady. "Robert, how does it feel to know that your biological family, the one who abandoned you at birth, is now sitting in this room watching you succeed beyond their wildest dreams?" The room went silent. My father's face turned pale, and my mother looked down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Robert didn't miss a beat. He smiled warmly at me and said, "I'm grateful for the family I have now, the one that accepted and loved me without conditions, and I'm grateful to have found my sister." He paused, looking directly at our parents, and added, "Some people in life lose their way, but others find family in the least expected places." The silence was deafening. My father stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger, and stormed out of the room, followed by my mother. Sophia, sitting beside them, looked as if she had seen a ghost. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had finally spoken the truth, and for the first time, I felt free. As the room erupted into chaos after Robert's powerful words, I stood there, absorbing the shockwaves. My parents were scrambling to leave, their once imposing figures now reduced to mere shadows of the people I had feared for so many years. The faces of the crowd were a mix of disbelief and curiosity. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, but strangely, I felt empowered. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the daughter they had controlled, the one they had tried to erase. I was a woman, a mother, finally telling my truth. Robert smiled at me, his eyes full of pride. "Thank you for that," he whispered, his voice warm and sincere. You gave me the strength I needed to say what was in my heart." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. I had no idea how powerful speaking the truth could be, especially when it felt like I had been silenced for so long. For so many years, I had kept my pain hidden, quietly accepting the blame my parents had placed on me, suffering in silence. But that moment, standing there in front of everyone, I had reclaimed my voice. I wasn't just a victim of my parents' cruelty. I was a survivor, and I wasn't alone anymore. The night went on with mingling and celebrations, but I couldn't shake the feeling of closure settling over me. My parents had always built an image of perfection, hiding the truth from everyone around them. The scandal, the abandonment of Robert, and the way they had treated me when I refused to conform to their expectations had all been swept under the rug, hidden from public view. But now, it was out in the open. Everyone could see them for what they truly were: people who prioritized their image over their own children's well-being. I stayed with Robert and his family that night, basking in the warmth of the acceptance I had longed for. They didn't know everything about my past, but they understood me. They accepted me, flaws and all, and I realized, in that moment, that family didn't have to be defined by blood. It was defined by love, support, and understanding. Robert and his family were now my family, and that was enough for me. The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of attention. The story spread quickly, and my parents' carefully constructed public image started to crumble. Local news outlets picked up on the scandal, and people in the community began to question my father's moral standing. His political career, built on a foundation of family values, seemed like a lie now. People were angry, they felt betrayed, and some were even calling for him to resign. It was a harsh reality for him, one that he couldn't escape. Meanwhile, my life continued to move forward. I had my family now, the one that truly mattered. Andrew, David, Kevin, and Zoe, and the ever-supportive Aunt Harper and Uncle Thomas. We were building something real, something honest. The love I felt for my family, my children, and even Robert gave me the strength to let go of my anger and resentment toward my parents. They had made their choices, and those choices were not my burden to bear anymore. But the consequences of their actions didn't stop at public shame. The more my father tried to salvage his reputation, the more it backfired. The community turned their back on him. He was no longer the respected figure he had once been. My mother, too, shrank into the background, her tears and regret nothing more than a facade to preserve her dignity. Sophia, my sister, who had always been loyal to them, found herself isolated. Her refusal to accept the truth about our family only deepened the rift between us. She couldn't understand why I had spoken out, and she made it clear that she wasn't interested in reconciling with me. In a tense phone call a few days later, Sophia made her position clear. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. "Don't ever contact me again. You're dead to me, just like you're dead to Mom and Dad." Her words didn't hurt as much as they once would have. There was a time when her approval had meant everything to me, but that time was long gone. I wasn't going to beg for her love or understanding anymore. I had fought too hard to reclaim my life and my dignity. Her rejection, like my parents, was just another confirmation that I didn't need to live by their rules anymore. As the days passed, the news about my parents' downfall continued to dominate the headlines. My father resigned from his position as mayor, and my mother, once so proud of her social status, withdrew from public life. The community moved on, and my parents became relics of a past I was glad to leave behind. But despite the peace I had found in moving forward, the past still had its hold on me. I couldn't escape the anger that lingered, nor the ache in my heart whenever I thought about my own family, the family I had been denied. Robert, too, carried his own wounds from the past, but together, we had built something new. Our bond grew stronger every day, and I found comfort in knowing that I wasn't alone in this world anymore. One afternoon, while I was enjoying a rare moment of quiet in my living room, the phone rang again. This time it was Michael, my first love, the father of my son, the man who had abandoned me when I needed him most. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. His voice was tentative when he spoke. "Grace?" he said. "I've been thinking about us. About what happened. I know we can't change the past, but I was wondering if you might be willing to consider giving us another chance." I was taken aback. How could he come back now, after all these years, after everything he had done? I had worked so hard to build a life for myself, and now he wanted to waltz back in, as if time had stood still. I couldn't let him destroy the peace I had found. I took a deep breath, holding my ground. "Michael," I said calmly, "you made your choice 20 years ago. You walked away when I needed you, and now, just because things aren't going well for you and Sophia, you think you can come back into my life. It doesn't work like that. I have a family now, and I don't need you." He tried again, but I wasn't listening anymore. "Goodbye, Michael," I said firmly, and hung up the phone. The weight lifted from my chest. I had finally let go of the past, of all the people who had hurt me. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had found something far more valuable: true love, support, and acceptance from the people who mattered. And as the days continued, I finally embraced the freedom I had fought for. I was no longer defined by the people who abandoned me. I was defined by the life I had built with those who truly loved me, my true family. Robert and I grew closer, and his family became an integral part of mine. Aunt Harper and Uncle Thomas, my steadfast supporters, continued to be my rock. David, now a teenager, excelled in everything he put his mind to. Zoe, my daughter, was growing into a strong, kind-hearted young girl. Life was hard, but it was full of love. It was a life worth living, and I had earned every bit of it. The days after the public unraveling of my parents' lives felt surreal. There was a sense of finality in it all, a closure I didn't know I needed. The past, the hurt, the rejection, the betrayal, had been exposed for what it was. My parents, once figures of power and control in my life, were now reduced to shadows, their carefully curated public image shattered. My father, the man who had always preached about integrity, had been revealed for the hypocrite he was. My mother, who had always sided with him, was left to deal with the fallout. It wasn't just my life that had been turned upside down, their entire world had crumbled. I couldn't say I felt sympathy for them, not after all the years of pain they had caused, but I did feel a certain relief. Relief that I was finally free of their grip. Robert, too, was thriving in a way that I had never imagined. To see him succeed, to watch him stand proudly in front of people who once turned their backs on him, it was a reminder that life has a way of offering redemption even when we don't ask for it. He had achieved so much, and I was so proud of him, not just as my brother, but as the person he had become. We had both suffered under the weight of our parents' neglect, but now we were carving out lives for ourselves that were far better than anything they had ever given us. It wasn't long before Robert and I started to talk about our childhood more openly. Each conversation felt like a piece of the puzzle falling into place. He shared his pain of being abandoned at the hospital, something that had haunted him for years. It was still hard for him to fully understand why our parents had done what they did. As for me, I had my own feelings of betrayal to sort through. The things they had said to me, the way they had treated me, those scars would take time to heal. But in Robert, I found someone who understood. I didn't have to explain everything. He just got it. One afternoon, while Robert and I were sitting in the living room at Aunt Harper's house, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. I had been so lost for so long, trying to please my parents, trying to fit into the box they had created for me. But now, I was living on my own terms. I had my own family, a life that I had built with my own hands, and that felt more fulfilling than anything my parents could have offered me. I looked at my son, David, now a teenager, sitting at the table doing his homework, and I realized just how much he had become the person I always hoped I could be. He had grown into a confident, kind-hearted young man, and I was proud of him. I was also proud of myself for raising him without the toxic influence of my parents in my life. David's success in school, his achievements on the baseball field, these were the things that mattered now. And Zoe, my beautiful daughter, was growing into a strong young girl who, like her brother, would never have to face the kind of emotional neglect I did as a child. I promised myself that no matter what happened, I would protect them, just as Aunt Harper and Uncle Thomas had protected me. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs. Just as everything seemed to be falling into place, the past came calling again, in the most unexpected way. It was a day like any other when I got the call. My phone rang, and the number on the screen was unfamiliar. At first, I was hesitant to answer, but something about it nagged at me. I picked it up. "Grace, this is Mia," the voice on the other end said. Mia, Michael's mother. My first instinct was to hang up, but something stopped me. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to her speak. "I know it's been a long time, but we just found out about David." "Is it true? Do we have a grandson?" I felt a lump form in my throat. Michael's parents had been told by him and my parents that I had gone through an abortion all those years ago. They had been deceived, and now they were learning the truth. The shock on Mia's voice was unmistakable. She sounded both eager and nervous, as though she had been carrying the weight of this secret for years. After a long pause, I spoke. "Yes," I said softly, my heart still racing. "David is your grandson." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Mia spoke again, her voice trembling. "We'd like to meet him. If that's okay with you, we'd love to see him." I thought about it for a moment. Michael and my parents had been the ones to make all the decisions for me in the past, telling me what I could and couldn't do, who I could and couldn't be. But this was different. Michael's parents had been lied to, just like I had been. They didn't deserve to be punished for the sins of their son and their own misjudgment. I took a deep breath and answered, "Okay, I'll talk to David and see if he's open to meeting you." That evening, I spoke with David. He was hesitant at first, but after a few days of thinking it through, he agreed. He was kind-hearted, and he had a forgiving nature that I admired. I made the arrangements, and we met them at a quiet park. It was an emotional meeting. Both sides had so much to say, so much to explain, but despite the awkwardness, it went well. There were tears, hugs, and a lot of catching up. Michael's parents were overjoyed to meet their grandson, and David, being the loving and accepting person he was, welcomed them into his life without hesitation. As time went on, David and his new grandparents developed a strong bond. They made up for lost time, and with their love and support, David gained a sense of family history he had never known before. It was a gift for him, one I couldn't have given him on my own. It was an experience that made him feel whole in a way that no one else could. The next chapter in my life was one of peace. I focused on my family, Andrew, David, Zoe, and Kevin. The rhythm of our lives was steady and comforting. With the support of Andrew, Aunt Harper, and Uncle Thomas, I had built a home filled with love, laughter, and stability. I no longer felt the weight of the past or the expectations of my parents hanging over me. I had found my true family, the one that loved me unconditionally. One evening, while we were all having dinner, I received a message that made my heart stop. It was from Robert. He had a new book out, and he was doing a signing in our town. He wanted me there. I smiled to myself. The thought of attending, being in that space again, with all the people who had judged me for so long, felt like a chance to finally close the door on that part of my life. I was no longer their victim. I had taken control of my own destiny, and now I was going to embrace the success I had built. When the day of the signing arrived, I walked into that ballroom with my head held high. I was no longer the scared, abandoned girl I once was. I was a woman who had fought for everything she had, who had endured pain and suffering, but had come out stronger on the other side. My family was with me, Robert, Aunt Harper, Andrew, and the kids. They were my real family, the ones who mattered. As I stood there, watching Robert speak about his journey, about the hardships we both faced, I realized how far I had come. I was no longer the person who had been cast aside by my parents. I was someone who had found her way, surrounded by the people who truly loved and supported her. The applause filled the room, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was my moment. I made it. I looked over at my parents, sitting in the front row. Their faces were pale, their masks of perfection shattered, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I simply felt peace. The weight of their judgment had finally been lifted. I had found my truth, and that truth had set me free. The night ended with Robert and me together, sharing stories of our past and planning for the future. I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The years of pain, the rejection, the judgment, it was all behind me, and I came out stronger because of it. Story 2. After her husband passed away tragically 2 years ago, Amelia Brooks, a 36-year-old bakery entrepreneur in the rainy city of Seattle, had created a straightforward but contented existence. Her existence revolved around her little bakery, where she gave her all to make delicious sweets for the locals. In addition to running her company, she spent her days taking care of her 10-year-old daughter Lila, whose laughter filled their quaint little home on the edge of the woods. Amelia Backslash's life was about to take a drastic turn, despite her best efforts to move on. Caleb, a charming and caring man, entered her life by happenstance and gave her hope for a family and love. However, Caleb was accompanied by his powerful mother, Victoria Grant, whose disapproval concealed darker, more deadly intentions. A critical incident that would permanently alter Amelia's life resulted from what started out as a mild tension turning into treachery and manipulation. Amelia Brooks had always thought of herself as a strong lady, but she was in pieces after losing her husband 2 years earlier, and she wasn't sure she would ever be able to put herself back together. Her life had been destroyed by Ryan's untimely death in a horrific boating accident. He had been her anchor and her companion in every way. Left alone with Lila, her daughter, who was 8 years old at the time. For the sake of her kid, Amelia struggled with sadness while attempting to keep things somewhat normal. Lila gave her motivation to continue. Even in the face of such a great loss, the tomboyish, adventurous girl possessed the energy of her father and the fiery determination of her mother. Amelia was frequently lifted out of her lowest points by Lila's irrepressible enthusiasm and love of the great outdoors. They would hike the trails close to their cottage or bake cookies in their little but cozy kitchen for hours on end. These instances were little triumphs for Amelia in her fight to rediscover happiness. Located in a peaceful area of Seattle, her bakery turned to become a haven and a lifeline. Locals have grown to enjoy the exquisite pastries made by kneading dough in the mornings. Even though she gave her all at work, the long hours and financial strain were too much to handle. Although it was difficult, she saw operating the bakery alone as a means of maintaining the life she had vowed to provide for Lila. Amelia struggled with loneliness despite her best attempts. It was bittersweet to spend evenings at their old cabin, with the gentle sound of rain pattering against the windows. Although Lila's inquiry and laughter were a comfort, Amelia was still feeling empty, since Ryan was not there. She questioned if sadness and survival would continue to define her world, or whether she would ever feel complete again. Then came Caleb, a fortuitous meeting that would gradually upset the delicate balance she had established. His effortless charm and generosity toward Lila and Amelia seemed like a lifeline. However, Amelia's world had been one of quiet perseverance before to Caleb's arrival, replete with strong and loving moments, but also overshadowed by the sadness of losing the guy who had been everything to her. Her relationship with Lila was her lifeline, but as she would soon discover, the difficulties that awaited her would put even that to the test. Amelia Brooks and her daughter Lila made the decision to go to the park on a normal cloudy afternoon in Seattle. The route was soggy but appealing, and the air was crisp once the rain had stopped for a short while. To help Lila burn off her endless energy, Amelia would frequently take her to the park. Lila enjoyed going full speed on her bike. Amelia took comfort in the steady patter of her daughter's travels, while her laughter reverberated through the treetops. But on this specific day, everything was different. While Lila sped forward on her bike, Amelia sat on a bench and responded to emails on her phone. Calling back to her mother to witness her latest trick, her voice rang out with joy. "I can do it with one hand, see, Mama." Amelia's pride and terror caused her heart to suddenly race as she looked up. "Watch out, Lila," she said. However, Lila was already cycling more quickly as her self-assurance increased. Then catastrophe hit. Lila's bike wobbled wildly on a spot of slippery mud. The handlebars twisted, and she lost her balance, causing her to scream. Amelia dropped her phone in fright and sprang to her feet, her heart sinking. However, a stranger seemed to materialize out of nowhere before she could get to her kid. The man was quick on his feet and caught Lila before she could fall to the ground. He put her back on her feet gently and murmured, "Gotcha," in a steady, quiet voice. A few seconds later, Amelia arrived at them, breathing in frantic breaths. "God, oh God. Thank you," she said, embracing Lila tightly. "Are you all okay, my love?" Lila nodded, her eyes wide as she gazed up at her savior. "Mom, he saved me." The man grinned broadly. He was in his early 40s, with kind eyes and a tough exterior that complemented his hiking boots and rain-soaked overcoat. He responded in a quiet yet comforting manner. "I'm just glad I was nearby. By the way, my name is Caleb." Still trembling, she said, "Amelia. And this is Lila, my kid. Thank you. If you hadn't been here, I'm not sure what would have happened." "It's no trouble," Caleb answered, shrugging his shoulders modestly. "Children are brave, aren't they?" Caleb started to show up in their lives more often after that day. It was coincidental at first. /U, 2014, a quick chat while Lila was playing, or an occasional wave in the park. However, those interactions quickly developed into much more. Caleb would visit the bakery for coffee, occasionally staying to talk to Amelia, while Lila excitedly told him about her most recent travels. When Lila found out that he lived in a comfortable old cabin tucked away in the woods, she fell in love with him and gave him the nickname Cabin Caleb. His calm manner contrasted with Amelia's reserved temperament, adding a solid presence to their lives. As time went on, Amelia began to anticipate his visits. Amelia's initial concerns were allayed by Caleb's sincere interest in Lila's stories and his ability to make her laugh. Caleb proposed that they get coffee together one day. Amelia agreed, hesitantly but curiously, that a simple coffee date had evolved into supper. And shortly, late-night discussions that continued into the morning. Caleb wasn't only nice, he was perceptive, and always looked for ways to make Lila and Amelia feel valued. We can have spontaneous adventures, movie evenings at his cabin, and zoo outings. For the first time since Ryan's passing, they gradually included Caleb into their life. Something that Amelia believed she had lost forever began to reappear. /in 2014. I hope. The guy who had rescued her daughter was no longer Caleb. He was joining them in their small family, and the prospect of a fresh start accompanied him. Amelia and Caleb's bond grew stronger as the weeks stretched into months in ways neither had foreseen. What started out as friendly park encounters quickly developed into frequent coffee dates and meaningful discussions. Amelia didn't know she needed a safe haven until he entered her life, but Caleb's easy charm and caring demeanor provided it. Their first official date was straightforward, but ideal. After inviting Amelia and Lila to his old cabin in the woods, Caleb prepared a filling dinner and showed them his dog, Max. Lila. Ever the explorer, he soon began exploring the cabin, pointing out items such as Caleb's collection of nature photos and the vintage record player. Amelia and Caleb, meanwhile, sat on the porch drinking tea and discussing everything from his job as an environmental consultant to her bakery. Amelia confessed, "I haven't laughed this much in ages." Her cheeks get warm from Caleb's full attention and laughter. Then, in a light but earnest tone, he said, "I'll have to make sure you laugh more often." Amelia grew even more fond of Caleb because of his innate ability to connect with Lila. He played catch with her in the yard, listened to her stories with great interest, and even assisted her in building a treehouse on one of their weekend excursions. In response, Lila started calling him Cabin Caleb, a moniker she used with unending fondness. One morning, following a sleepover at Cabin Caleb's house, she declared that he makes the best pancakes. She had syrup all over her face. Amelia was delighted to see Lila so content and carefree. It had been years since she felt more than just special because of Caleb. He gave them both a sense of belonging. Caleb established himself as a constant in their lives as their relationship developed. He prepared small surprises, such as bringing Amelia pastries from a different bakery to sample or bringing a bouquet of wildflowers to Lila's school play. On calmer days, they would spend evenings at Amelia's cabin, where Caleb and Amelia would tell stories to each other while Lila dozed off on the couch. These were life-changing moments for Amelia. After years of feeling like she was merely surviving, Caleb made her feel alive again. She found herself rediscovering parts of her identity she thought she'd buried with Ryan. Caleb's patience, kindness, and unwavering support gave her the courage to embrace the possibility of happiness once more. As the seasons changed, so did Amelia's heart. With Caleb by her side and Lila thriving, she began to see a future that wasn't defined by loss, but by love, resilience, and hope. Caleb wasn't just someone she was falling for. He was the person helping her rebuild her life. One joyful moment at a time, it was a crisp autumn evening when Caleb decided to propose. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted in shades of deep orange and indigo. Amelia, completely unaware of what was about to happen, had been invited to Caleb's vintage cabin for what she thought was a simple family dinner. The soft glow of fairy lights, strung across the backyard, created a magical atmosphere, while the crackle of a small fire added warmth to the cool evening. Lila, always eager to help Caleb with his surprises, had been bubbling with excitement all day, but managed to keep the secret. She led Amelia outside, claiming Caleb wanted to show her something super cool. As Amelia stepped into the backyard, she paused, her breath catching at the sight. Caleb stood beneath a canopy of twinkling lights, a soft smile on his face. The table behind him was set with her favorite dishes and a bouquet of wildflowers. Her favorite sat in the center. Lila darted ahead, her enthusiasm shining as she took a seat near the fire, barely able to contain her grin. Amelia. Caleb began stepping closer, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for hers. From the moment I met you, you and Lila have brought light and love into my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me what family truly means, and I can't imagine a future without you both. Amelia's eyes filled with tears as Caleb got down on one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate, vintage-inspired ring that perfectly reflected her style. "Will you marry me?" Caleb asked, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Before Amelia could answer, Lila jumped to her feet, clapping her hands and shouting, "Say yes, ma'am! Please say yes!" Amelia laughed through her tears, nodding as she pulled Caleb to his feet. "Yes, Caleb, 1,000 times yes." Lila squealed with joy, throwing her arms around them both. "I'm going to have a family, Caleb. There is going to be my real dad." The three of them hugged tightly, their little family now officially coming together under the glow of the lights, the promise of love and excitement of a new beginning. Amelia Brooks had always prided herself on staying composed, but meeting Caleb's mother, Victoria Grant, tested her like nothing else. From the moment Amelia stepped into Victoria's grand estate, she felt the weight of disapproval. The mansion was as intimidating as its owner, gleaming floors, towering chandeliers, and an air of perfection that seemed designed to unsettle anyone who dared step inside. Victoria met her at the door with a handshake that was forceful but chilly, her keen stare raking across Amelia as if memorizing every fault. "So you're Amelia," she replied, her tone courteous but aloof. "Caleb has talked highly about you." Amelia faked a grin, squeezing Layla's hand for support. "It's great to meet you, Mrs. Grant. Caleb's told me so much about you." Victoria's gaze darted to Lila, who was carrying a little flower she had gathered earlier as a gesture of compassion. "And this must be your daughter," Victoria replied, her tone hardening ever so little. "Layla, is it?" Layla nodded, handing out the bouquet with a bright grin. "I chose these for you, Mrs. Grant." Victoria received the flowers with a slight grin, though her eyes lingered on Layla in a way that made Amelia's stomach knot. "How nice," she remarked, placing the flower on an adjacent table without a second glance. "Caleb's affection for kids is endearing." Amelia nibbled on her lip. Perceiving the implicit condemnation, the remainder of the evening transpired in a sequence of nuanced yet incisive statements. Victoria concealed her contempt beneath a facade of courteous inquiry as she inquired about Amelia's work as a bakery owner. "Don't you work from home? That gives you some freedom, I guess." As she went on, her gaze lingered on Amelia's modest clothing. Managing a company and raising a child alone must be challenging. Caleb has consistently worked very hard. Someone who can keep up is what he deserves. With every remark, Amelia's heart plummeted, but she remained calm, determined not to let Victoria see her wince. Victoria's disdain was evident despite Caleb's attempts to diffuse the atmosphere with casual chat. Amelia was emotionally spent by the time they departed. Caleb reached over and squeezed her hand in the vehicle. "I apologize," he replied quietly. "She is only defensive. She will change her mind." Though skepticism gnawed at her, Amelia forced a grin. Victoria wasn't only being protective when she expressed displeasure, it was intimate. Amelia sensed it beneath the surface of courteous smiles and truncated speech. Victoria wasn't only against her, she desired her departure. The initial encounter had established the framework for a conflict Amelia was unaware she was about to engage in. Victoria Grant started to get involved in every facet of Caleb and Amelia's wedding preparations as soon as they announced their engagement. What ought to have been a happy moment for Amelia swiftly devolved into a taxing endurance test. Victoria was always interfering. Every recommendation and choice she made was tinged with her disdain. It began quietly, with remarks passed off as constructive counsel. A modest wedding. Victoria raised a perfectly manicured eyebrow as she said, "It won't work when Amelia says she wants something personal. A party worthy of Caleb's status is in order." Before Amelia could answer, Victoria had already begun to enumerate ambitious projects that she believed would be more suitable, the most of which were much above Amelia's financial means or her own vision. Amelia made an effort to reach a compromise by proposing a location that struck a mix between intimacy and elegance. Victoria, however, wasn't content. When they visited the location, she said, with a little smirk, "It's charming. However, don't you believe Caleb would look better in something a little more sophisticated?" There was more criticism to come. Amelia showed Victoria her ideal wedding gown, which was understated, classic, and sophisticated. Victoria's nose furrowed as though she had been seen something that wasn't worthy. Her tone hardly concealed her contempt as she answered, "It's fine. However, Caleb's wife ought to dress more elegantly. After all, there will be many notable visitors at this wedding." "For Caleb's sake," Amelia nodded courteously, even as her heart sunk. She allowed Victoria to influence her decision, and ended up choosing a dress that was far more elaborate than she had originally intended. When she showed him the outfit, Caleb saw how disappointed she was, and gave her a tight hug. "No matter what, you will look stunning." He comforted her. "Keep her from ruining this for us." Victoria's meddling intensified in spite of Caleb's encouragement. She took over of the guest list and started inviting people Amelia didn't even know, including friends and business associates. One evening, Victoria demanded that we include the Graysons, a prominent family in her social circle. "We're good friends, and it would be a bad impression if they weren't invited." Knowing that an argument would only worsen the situation, Amelia bit her tongue. However, Victoria's authority over the wedding specifics wasn't the worst aspect. Her subtle, scathing comments were what undermined Amelia's self-assurance. "It's a shame you don't come from a more connected family," Victoria said casually at one planning meeting. "You may find it difficult to adapt because Caleb has always been a part of particular groups." Beneath the table, Amelia clenched her hands, resisting the need to strike back. She mustered a grin instead. "Caleb and I will figure things out on our own." Victoria's eyes did not meet her grin. "I hope so." Amelia put a lot of effort into keeping the peace for Caleb's sake, despite the emotional toll. She reminded herself that maintaining harmony was a necessary component of their future together, and that Victoria was his mother. However, Amelia secretly understood that nothing would ever be sufficient for Victoria. Know of how much she gave up. The ceremony was no longer the only aspect of the wedding. The battleground was now quiet, and Amelia was struggling to maintain her joy. When Amelia and Caleb learned they were having their first child together, they were ecstatic. Several months of arranging their nuptials and establishing their relationship with Layla. Finding out about the pregnancy seemed like the ideal next step. Amelia was apprehensive about Layla's reaction, but her worries were allayed by her daring daughter's enthusiasm. Amelia made the decision to break the news to Caleb one evening, while they were all having supper together in his comfortable cabin. She instructed Layla to open a little, wrapped box that she had placed in front of her. There was a small pair of baby shoes inside. Layla's gaze shifted from the shoes to her mother, and her eyes grew wide. "Does this imply that I will become an older sister?" Amelia gave a nod, her eyes filled with tears of happiness. "Yes, dear. You will be the most amazing big sister ever." Layla threw her arms around Amelia and shouted with delight, "I am overjoyed. I will impart all of my knowledge to the infant." Caleb smiled, bringing Amelia into a cozy hug. With enthusiasm in his voice, he declared, "This is the best news. Our family is always expanding." Over the course of the following few days, Caleb was eager to tell his mother the news in the hopes that it might change her attitude toward Amelia. But Amelia was reluctant. Even in situations that ought to strengthen bonds, she had learned to anticipate Victoria's rejection. Caleb couldn't contain his joy when he contacted Victoria to tell her the news. "Amelia, Mom and I have some amazing news. You will become a grandma." When Victoria eventually spoke, there was a lengthy silence on the other end of the telephone. Her voice was abrasive. "A grandmother. Caleb, are you certain that this is good news? Have you given any thought to whether the child is indeed yours?" Amelia stood motionless, listening in on the talk, and Caleb's expression tightened. "How can you say that at all, Mom? The baby is mine, of course." But Victoria wasn't finished. "Caleb, you must consider your options. A pregnancy might be used as a trap by a lady like Amelia. You've always had too much faith." Amelia's eyes welled up with tears as Caleb stood up for her. "You're out of line, Mom. Amelia and I are creating a family together, and I adore her. You must stop." Victoria, however, continued. Caleb admitted to Amelia a few days later that his mother had gone too far. She engaged a private detective. His voice was angry as he said, "Amelia, she wants to learn more about your past. She believes you are concealing something." Amelia felt her heart sink. What is she hoping to discover? "I haven't done anything improper." "I am aware of that," Caleb replied, drawing her near. "I informed her of this as well. But you are aware of her nature. She wants to be in charge of everything." Amelia was always on edge because she knew someone was observing her. Because of Victoria's mistrust, she began to look over her shoulder every time she left the bakery, which made her nervous. Layla tried to lift her mother's spirits with her typical antics after noticing that she was uncomfortable. But there was no denying the stress. Victoria's harshness had marred the happiness of the baby news, even with Caleb's support. Amelia saw that Victoria wasn't only expressing disapproval. At all costs, she was committed to causing a rift between them. However, Amelia made the decision to defend her family, even if it meant confronting Victoria in a way she had never done before. There had been a false pleasantry in the invitation to dinner at Victoria Grant's mansion. "Let's attempt a new beginning," Victoria had said in a clipped fake voice. Ever optimistic, Caleb urged Amelia to agree. "Perhaps she's finally warming up," he said. Although she wasn't persuaded, Amelia consented for the sake of it. She felt in her heart that Victoria's offer was more about dominance than it was about making amends. Amelia spent hours smothering the developing pit in her stomach on the day of the meal. For Lila's sake, she chose a modest clothing and made an effort to relax. As always, Layla was her intelligent, upbeat self, thrilled about the magnificent home and eager to see if Caleb's mother would finally show interest in them. With a smile, she responded, "Don't worry, Mom. You are the greatest." Oh, as usual, there was a sense of fear about the home when they entered. There was a noticeable tension. With her customary air of civility, Victoria greeted them, her gaze sweeping over Amelia and Layla with hardly concealed disapproval. The elegant dining room, with its long table set with crystal glasses and beautiful china, was the venue for the dinner service. However, the sophisticated environment was unable to conceal Victoria's cold attitude. Victoria's scathing remarks interrupted the conversation throughout the lunch, so she added, "Amelia," in a suave but condescending tone, "how is your small bakery doing?" Juggling it with having a child must be a real struggle. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she stopped. Especially with your pregnancy currently. I sincerely hope that Caleb isn't taking on too much of the workload. Amelia clutched her fork and faked a grin, her knuckles white. The bakery is doing nicely, thank you. Additionally, Caleb and I work well together. Victoria's mouth formed a little contemptuous smirk. That's one perspective, I guess. Despite Caleb's efforts to divert, Victoria's remarks only became more scathing as the evening went on. Amelia excused herself to the bathroom since she could feel her tolerance ebbing by the time dessert was brought. As she stood at the top of the large staircase, gazing down at the opulent decor below, she heard footsteps behind her, which she welcomed as an opportunity to take a breath and gather herself. Victoria's voice was piercing and icy. My son will never be satisfied with you. Amelia's heart was racing as she slowly turned. Mrs. Grant, I'm not attempting to prove anything to you. I'm in love with Caleb, and we're starting a family, regardless of your opinion. Victoria took a step forward, her gaze piercing. All you are is a burden. I will not allow you to destroy his life. Victoria moved forward with her hand outstretched before Amelia could react. It was an unexpected but purposeful thrust. Amelia also lost her footing. She fell down the steps, her body thudding sickeningly with every step, and the world twisted. Lila's frightened cry was the last sound she heard before everything went dark. Mom. The dull, throbbing agony that shot through Amelia's body was the first thing she felt. Her senses were overwhelmed by the hospital's antiseptic odor, and she was halted as she attempted to walk by a harsh ECG. Her eyes opened slowly, and the hazy objects around her started to take shape. With his head in his hands, Caleb sat by her bed. His typically composed expression was altered by obvious concern. Caleb. Amelia's voice was weak and harsh as she croaked. As he reached for her hand, his head flew up and a look of relief crossed his face. Softly, his voice quivering, he murmured, "You're awake. I'm grateful." Amelia blinked, trying to make sense of what had transpired. Then she realized, the stairs, the supper, Victoria's icy remarks. A wave of panic swept across her chest. The infant. Her free hand automatically went to her stomach as she spoke. Is the infant doing well? Caleb's eyes gleamed with unshed tears as he firmly clasped her hand. He is present. Amelia, our son is secure. He is well, but they had to have an emergency C-section. Tears ran down her cheeks as relief washed over her. I must see him. After Caleb hit the nurse's call button, a nurse wheeled in a tiny bassinet in a matter of seconds. She gently swaddled a little infant in Amelia's arms. As her newborn son's little fingers curled around her bosom, Amelia glanced down at him. Despite the stress and anguish, love overcame her because he was wonderful. We gave him the name Noah, Caleb spoke quietly. I assumed you would enjoy that. Cradling their kid, Amelia nodded, speechless. However, the moment's tranquility was fleeting as her thoughts wandered back to the fall. Caleb. Her voice was shaking as she started. Mommy? She gave me a shove. Anger flashed in his eyes and his jaw tensed. I am aware, he spoke aggressively. Layla witnessed everything, she informed me. I've already had a conversation with the cops. Amelia's kid had seen such a horrific event, and her heart hurt for her. Diana, too. Her question was hardly audible above a whisper. Caleb responded, She's been arrested. She is accused of attempting to kill someone. A range of feelings, including grief, vindication, and a persistent sense of betrayal, were evoked by hearing those remarks. Amelia said to Noah, She could have killed me. Our son could have been killed by her. She won't harm us once again. Caleb's voice was steady as he promised. Layla, Noah, and you. I now consider you family. That's the only important thing. Emotions ran high during the trial. Amelia's fortitude and resolve are put to the test. Previously an untouchable lady, Diana Grant now occupied the defendant's chair. Her calm appearance revealed none of the chaos beneath the crowded courtroom. Both reporters and onlookers were keen to see a powerful socialite fall from grace. Amelia sat there and observed. Her soul remains strong, but her body continues to recover. Caleb sat next to her, silently supporting her with his hand in hers. Lila was close by, courageously getting ready to testify. Knowing how brave it would be to talk about that awful night, Amelia's heart hurt for her daughter. Diana was clearly the target of the prosecution's case. They described her history of domineering conduct, her obvious animosity against Amelia. Her behavior during the family supper is the most damning of all. The pivotal moment was Layla's testimony. Taking a position. For solace, Lila held on to a little plush animal that Caleb had given her. As she described what she had witnessed, her voice remained calm, despite her nervousness. My mom was advised by Grandma Diana that she wasn't suitable for Caleb. With her tiny hands clutching the edge of the witness stand, Lila said, "She then gave her a shove. She didn't trip. She fell because of Grandma." A silence descended across the courtroom as Lila's comments lingered. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. The sorrow of knowing her daughter had to relive that moment was mixed with pride. The fall was an accident, according to the defense. However, Lila's thorough description and further proof left little space for skepticism. Throughout the trial, Diana maintained her icy, unrepentant manner. She didn't even glance at Lila or Amelia. She concentrated only on keeping her remaining semblance of composure. However, her mask broke as the jury returned its judgment. The defendant, Diana Grant, is found guilty of attempted murder by the jury. The foreperson made an announcement. The courtroom erupted in gasps when the judge handed down Diana's punishment. For the first 10 years in jail without the chance of release. A rush of relief passed over Amelia. For Caleb, who had lost his mother in the process, it was tinged with melancholy. Reporters demanded remarks from the courtroom. Amelia, however, spoke simply. "What any mother would do, I did. I kept my family safe." As they walked out of the courtroom, Amelia carried baby Noah in Caleb's arms while holding Lila's hand securely. More significantly, they had come out stronger as a family, even though justice had been done. In the weeks after the trial, there was a mixture of careful reconstruction and silent relief. Despite being a source of calm, Diana's disappearance left traces of what had happened. However, Amelia was adamant that their future would not be shaped by the suffering of the past. She concentrated on the things that really important with Caleb, Lila, and infant Noah. Their household, Noah soon became the focal point of their universe. Even the most difficult times were made lighter by his adorable coos and little grins. Lila enthusiastically took on the role of big sister. She would sit next to his bassinet and make funny expressions or sing lullabies to get him to laugh. "I believe I'm his favorite, Mom." With pride, she would exclaim, her laughter contagious. Noah achieved a milestone one bright afternoon that united the entire family. He staggered around the living room on wobbly legs. He extended his little hands to Caleb. "Hurry up, friend." Caleb knelt down and held out his arms, encouraging. Lila enthusiastically clapped her hands and shuffled resolutely to encourage him. As Noah took his first steps, he immediately landed in Caleb's arms. "I knew he could do it," Lila said as the audience erupted in applause. With tears in her eyes, Amelia watched the spectacle, thankful for the pleasure and love that now surrounded them. She was reminded at these moments of how far they had come from the shadows of dread and treachery. They had become a tighter, more powerful family. Once the children were sleeping, evenings were their favorite time of day. Caleb and Amelia would enjoy the refreshing Seattle air while sitting on the porch of his old cabin. They would share their aspirations, future ambitions, and appreciation for one another. One night, Caleb exclaimed in an emotional voice, "You've made us a family. Without you, I'm not sure what I'd do." Amelia put her head on his shoulder and grinned. "We've all strengthened each other," she said. "And we will continue to construct this life together, no matter what." Their hearts changed with the seasons. They weren't only recovering, they were doing well, discovering happiness in the little things that make life so wonderful. They felt they could overcome anything together. Amelia couldn't help but think about how far they had come as she sat by their comfortable cabin's window and watched the rain gently tap on the glass. She had never been tested as she had been during the past year. Fear, treachery, and grief had threatened to shatter her. Despite everything, she had discovered a power she was unaware she possessed. She was anchored by her family. She had gotten through the worst of times thanks to Layla's laughing, Noah's naive awe, and Caleb's unfailing devotion. Even though they were flawed and had wounds from the past, they offered a tale of love, progress, and resiliency. Hearing Lila laugh from the other room made Amelia smile, and probably made Noah chuckle as well. She had a startling realization at that same time. Their family was characterized by the unbreakable relationship they had formed together, not by the hardships they had faced. They couldn't be stopped, they were home together,